Hello and welcome to Cemetery Stories Capital Connections Edition, Season 2. I'm your host, Capital Eric, and I'm a tour guide here at Sacramento Historic City Cemetery, as well as the California State Capitol Museum, a unit of California State Parks, just up the road. And I'd like to tell you today about one of our permanent residents here at the City Cemetery, someone who was connected in life or in death with the state capitol. Let's go. Don't be scared. Like Jane Norris and Joseph Owl from previous episodes of Cemetery Stories, Governor Newton Booth had a little secret that came to light years later. His secret had a name: Emma. Newton Booth was born in 1825 and raised in Indiana. He moved to California in 1850, where he enjoyed success as a merchant and wholesale grocer before beginning his political career. He served as a California state senator, governor, and U.S. senator, leaving that last office in 1881. A bachelor while holding political office, he married the widow of his former business partner in 1892. When asked why he waited so long to wed, he would often reply, "I loved once, but I could not marry the woman of my choice." The woman of his choice was a young widow, Emily Putnam. Newton proposed to Emily in 1855. She accepted, but for some reason the ceremony was delayed. In April of 1856, business called Booth away from his home in San Francisco, and while he was absent, a rival appeared for Emily's affections, a Mr. Smith. Booth returned to San Francisco in May, just hours after Emily married Smith. Emily later remarked that she married Mr. Smith only at the end of a pistol. 2 months later, in July, little Emma was born. The marriage was an unhappy one, and the couple divorced a year later. Newton renewed his pursuit of Emily, but she refused to ever marry again. Despite this, Booth provided emotional and financial support to mother and child. This arrangement went unaltered until Booth was elected governor in 1871, when Emma was 15, but had yet to be christened by her mother. Booth, although he had not publicly admitted to being Emma's father, wished that his daughter be christened Emma Booth, and threatened to cut off financial support if any other name were used. Emily was faced with a dilemma: either admit that Emma's father was not Mr. Smith, her husband at the time of Emma's birth, or lose the generous allowance from Emma's biological father. She decided on naming her child Emma Booth. This wasn't the only time that Booth wished to openly admit to Emma's paternity. In a political speech, a rival accused Booth of having a child he refused to acknowledge. Booth respected his daughter's privacy and did not want to give her name without her permission. Emily refused for fear of becoming a public disgrace, and her mother agreed. Shortly thereafter, Emma married George Fowler, a heavy drinker who would regularly desert Emma, and he demanded even more money from Booth. In May of 1875, Emily became deathly ill and asked Emma to write a letter addressed to Booth. Part of it read,
"For you know it is your legal as well as your moral duty to protect Emma."
Although Emma knew of Booth's financial support and realized his special fondness for her and her mother during his visits with them, this was the first she had heard of his true relationship to her. Emma and George had 2 children and divorced in 1878. Booth, now a U.S. senator, continued his financial support. As Emma once wondered to her mother about the special connection that Booth had with them, Emma's children asked the same thing of their mother. She would respond simply,
"Mr. Booth loved them because they loved their mother."
Emma married again in 1882 to William Sterrett, but it was another unhappy union and ended in 1887. In that year, Emma traveled to Sacramento to meet Booth, and in a very long conversation, Newton told Emma of his love for her mother and confirmed what Emily had told her years earlier about her biological father. Emma's paternity came to public light upon Booth's death in 1892. In a bit of irony, the man considered one of the greatest public speakers of the day died of cancer of the tongue. He had willed Emma $10,000, about $280,000 today, and 100 shares of his company. She then publicly admitted to being Booth's daughter and felt she was entitled to more of her father's estate. The financial support had stopped upon Booth's death, and despite how she lacked for nothing while he was alive, Emma had quickly become destitute. Being in such financial dire straits and unable to afford a lawsuit, she reluctantly agreed to the terms of her father's will. Governor Newton Booth is buried here near the front gate of Sacramento Historic City Cemetery, one of 3 state governors who permanently reside here. He rests alongside his wife, Octavina, and her first husband, Booth's business partner, Joseph Glover. Well, that's been another episode of Cemetery Stories Capital Connections Edition, Season 2. I'm your host, Capital Eric, and it's been my pleasure telling you a little bit about the cemetery as well as the state capitol. Now, unfortunately, during the pandemic, the California State Capitol Museum, a unit of California State Parks, is closed to the public. However, the cemetery remains open for a solitary stroll or some quiet contemplation. Keep up the social distancing, wash your hands, because it is better to be 6 feet apart than 6 feet under. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.